And thank you for traveling all this way to be here. I'm so excited to speak with you today. I loved the book. Sweet Fury was amazing for anyone who hasn't read it.
Thank you.
Can you give a brief description?
Yeah. Well, first of all, how many people have read the book? Okay, great. So that means no spoilers. Okay. So Sweet Fury is a literary thriller. It's about a woman named Lila Crane. She is America's sweetheart. She is a film actress, adored the whole world over. And at the start of the book, she and her famous film director boyfriend moved from LA to New York to the West Village because they are in pre-production to film a feminist adaptation of Fitzgerald's final completed novel, Tender is the Night, which they're shooting in the Hamptons. And so to prepare for the leading role that she's playing, Lila begins therapy with an esteemed therapist in the village named Jonah Gabriel to dig into the trauma of her own past. But as her life begins to unravel, the characters in the book soon become entangled in a deadly game of revenge.
And it was so good. It was beautiful. It was a literary thriller. I just loved it. Thought-provoking. It was my favorite book I've read this year.
Oh, thank you.
And so could you tell me, how did you get to this point? How did you become a published author? Have you written many things before this?
So I'll give, hi, yes, sneak through.
Be here.
Yeah, so my journey is a little bit roundabout. I started as an actor. I began acting professionally at age 6, and that was because I was an incurably shy child. I was one of those kids who you would say hi to, and I would bury my face in my mom's thigh and refuse to look at them. And my mom was like, this has to change. And so she had me, she had me audition for a regional production of A Christmas Carol, and I got in. And so I did the show, and then my mom was like, great, you're cured. And I said, no, mother, I found my passion. We moved to San Diego, where I grew up, and I continued acting professionally in regional theater, community theater, children's theater. And writing was always fun for me. I wrote my first quote unquote novel at age 7. And I was one of those kids who, I feel so bad for my friends in retrospect. We would have a sleepover, and I would say, okay, so for the sleepover, obviously I'm going to write and direct a musical and you're going to star in it. Like, they didn't really have a choice in the matter. So when I got into high school, I actually started driving up from San Diego to LA almost every day after school, auditioning for film and TV. And I would like prepare for whatever it was in the car on the way there, and then like shoot in the middle of the night, and then drive back and do my homework and have a sleep for a couple hours and then go back to school the next day. And while I was there, while I was in high school, my acting teacher and my mentor in high school said, I think you have an eye for directing. You should try directing. And so I did, and found that I really enjoyed it, but I had the blinders on. I was sure that I wanted to be an actor when I grew up. When it came time to choose colleges, I was really torn as to whether I wanted to go the conservatory route because I was so hell-bent on being an actor, or whether I wanted to have a more traditional academic setting. And so I ultimately chose Princeton, like you. And I chose it because of its creative writing department. It's one of the best in the country. So I got into Princeton, and academics were definitely low priority for me. I was doing a ton, like all the shows. And at Princeton, for the creative writing department, you don't just take the class. You have to apply to get into the class. And I applied and I applied, and I kept on getting rejected from the classes all through freshman year. I think it was like first semester of sophomore year. And finally, I wrote a letter to the head of the department, basically begging him to take pity on me, because that was the whole reason that I went to Princeton. And so we did. And I was accepted into a class taught by Joyce Carol Oates. And Joyce and I, it basically transformed my experience at Princeton. That became my academic home there. We have a very special, wonderful relationship. I was taught by her, by Jeffrey Eugenides. And then senior year, I did 2 theses. I directed both parts of Angels in America. And then I also wrote my first novel. However, when it came time to figure out what this thesis was, I remember Joyce saying to me, why don't you've bitten off a lot, why don't you create a book of short stories? And I was just so determined that I was going to be one of those alums who published their first novel that was their thesis. And so I was like, no, I am going to write a novel. And she was like, this is really not wise, Sarah Ashley. But I did it, and the novel was due the week that the show opened. Needless to say, the show was great. The novel was horrible. Yeah, I finally, Joyce has a reputation. She's such an amazing teacher, but she definitely has a reputation of making students cry at some point during the class, where they would leave the class in tears. Wow. And up until that point, I had been saved from that. I was like her golden child, but that time came for me with the thesis. And it's silly in retrospect, but at the time, that experience really shook my confidence as a writer. I felt like, oh, I don't think I have what it takes. And so by that point, I had made the decision to just fully focus on directing, switched off of acting. So I moved to New York and began to pursue a career as a theater director. I was directing a lot of shows off Broadway and off Broadway, but I was also climbing the ladder as an assistant director and then an associate director on Broadway. And all the while, right after college, I had created a writers group with my fellow Princeton graduates. And we've been going strong for 16 years. And as of this year, all 5 of us are published novelists, which is so exciting. It's amazing. And they've been like my backbone. But slowly, while I was pursuing this directing career, I wrote a second novel. And it took me a long time because it was, again, second priority to my directing career. But in 2018, I felt like it was good enough. It was a YA novel. I sent it around to agents. And I basically got the same response from most people, which was, this is good. It's not it. It's not the novel that's going to be published, but show us what you're writing next, which is really a great response to get in the industry. And so at that point, I was associate director of Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway and the national tour, which basically means that I was running those productions. So it was a big job. I've been doing that for 2 years, 2018 to 2020. And I remember on March 12th, I was in a rehearsal room putting in an actor for the Broadway show that night. And we get the call that the industry is shutting down. And so just like that, everything went away. And so I spent a couple of months, crying and then was like, I've got to do something. Like, the pandemic isn't going anywhere. And so I called up one of the agents that I developed a relationship with through that second novel and said, can I pitch you 5 ideas for 5 different books? And she said, sure. And so I did. And the 5th one, she said, that is the book I've never read before. That's the book you have to write. And that book was Sweet Fury.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations. And you're so persistent at every step of the way. And it really shows
to the
that
point of madness.
But it really shows that you've put so much thought and effort behind the book. You have such command over the prose and the story.
Thank you.
So it's really beautiful work.
Thank you.
Would you like to read a passage?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. Okay, I'm just going to read the prologue because it's nice and short and it doesn't give up any spoilers. She stands there in the aftermath, trapped behind a wall of glass in a silent, seismic horror. Outside, dawn is just beginning its pearl, the sky over the Hudson a blooming bruise, skin of the water slate to silver, fingers of fog curling in. The world a milky calm, still unmarred by the carnage within. But she knows nothing will ever be the same again. Her stunned gaze travels down to her dress, stippled darkly with red. Her innocent hands somehow sticky with blood. So much blood everywhere, so terribly bright. Her stomach swells. She can't think of it. She takes in the surviving remnants of the devastated room, the black book, the apocalyptic painting, the gold mask with its unseeing eyes, the knife, Beyond the glass, the clouds shift and the blade flashes, blinding. She won't look at the slump of flesh on the floor, puddle still spreading, the sick within her rising. No, she must put a stop to it, once and for all. He's turned towards the balcony, backlit against the horizon's slow swell, one foot lunging before the other in a runner's stance, as though it might be any other morning, as though he might simply go for a jog, return with a coffee, steaming in the early chill. In the distance, one by one, the green lights of the shore beyond begin to blink out. She must act quickly. Time is running out, and she's still in mortal danger. She presses her palms to her ears, forces her focus to the sound of that soothing inner swirl, draws within herself a plucked chord singing to stillness, breathes. She opens her eyes, unlocks her phone, and then she places the call. "Please help me," she whispers, and the tears begin to stream. "Someone's been stabbed. Oh God, I think he's dead."
Amazing. And for those who don't know, Sash also read the audiobook.
Yeah.
Right?
I did.
How was that process?
Oh my God.
It was amazing.
Thank you. It's a funny story. So, I had my acting background, and when we sold the book to Simon & Schuster, I said to my agents, I really, really want to read the audiobook. It's really important to me. And they were like, okay, Sash. You probably know that it's very common for nonfiction authors to read their own audiobook. It's very rare in fiction. And they were like, we're going to try, but the best you should hope for is we can write in your contract that you'll get an audition. And so I was, yeah. And I was floored when I received my contract and it said that I could do it, no questions asked. So I thought, great. However, then, so audiobooks aren't recorded until a couple of months right before pub. And I get this email from my publisher being like, hey, Sash, here are some demos from some audiobook narrators. Do you want to pick who you would like? And I was like, I don't think you were aware that it's in my contract. And it's very common these days, very in vogue, as you probably know, to have multiple narrators for the audiobook. And this book could very easily be a two-hander of a male voice and a female voice. And so they sort of responded and were like, okay, well, how about you choose from one of these male voices if you're going to play Lila, And I, really turned into myself and said, why does this feel so important to me? Is this like an ego thing? But I think for me, it really wasn't. It was about a number of things. I think one thing is that do you listen to a lot of audiobooks?
I do.
Yeah. I have one of those attention spans where I'm not good at audiobooks. Like I just find my attention drifting. But I love audiobooks of my favorite books that I've already read, that I know them. It's just like a new way to experience them all over again. But I find in my director's brain that when I'm listening to those audiobooks, there'll be moments where I'm like listening to them, I'm like, that was not the author's intention at all. What are they playing there,
Yeah.
The audiobook experience of having, being in the studio is so fast. Most times you are not given the opportunity to record things twice. It's like once through.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so, for me, it was like, who knows this book more intimately than me? My weird thing for my editing process is every time I edit, I have to read it aloud to myself. I speak it aloud. My husband calls it the memer murmur, where he'll hear me like making strange noises from the other room. And so I've like read this thing hundreds of times out loud. I was so familiar with it. And also, all of these characters, nobody is who they seem. And I really wanted to make sure that whoever played it was playing against the truth the entire time. So I really stuck to my guns. And I go in, they are like, okay, it's in your contract. So I go in and I'm in this teeny tiny studio, soundproof studio, and my executive producer and the mixer are through the glass. And, I've got like a pillow over my belly because the microphone picks up the gurgling sound. It picks up like the spit sound in your mouth. Like it's all very embarrassing. And I go in being like, nervous, but like, I think I got this. And so the executive producer is like, okay, just start at the beginning. And so I do the prologue and like, I do an okay job. Like I'm nervous. And then I finish and she's like, and I hear her say, okay, we're going to be okay. And I later find out from an author friend that she was going to record her book and she started recording her book and she got fired.
Wow.
So they had every intention of firing me if I sucked. Yeah.
They just forgot to mute the mic when they
totally. But it was one of the most intense, hardest things I've ever done. Wow. Like I thought that being an audiobook narrator was just like acting. I thought I totally had it. It is not just acting. It is so much harder. Mm-hmm. It's so exhausting in terms of just like the intensity of the concentration. Mm-hmm. I was doing 5 hours a day, 5 days in a row. And you're not breaking except like once every hour and a half to go pee. Mm-hmm. And so like if my mind wandered at all, you could totally hear it. Like mm-hmm. the listener could hear it. My husband described it to one of my best friends as like, think of it this way. It's Sash directing Sash, reading Sash. Like it's very intense. Yeah. And so like afterwards, I was just so physically exhausted. Mm-hmm. I was such a grump. Like I was on vocal rest, doing all these weird like throat sprays and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot, but I'm so glad that I did it. I definitely want to do it for all my books going forward.
That makes sense because you did a great job. I was listening to it and forgetting that it was you.
Oh, thank you.
Not that, it's great now knowing you, but it was just really well done.
Thank you.
And what inspired Sweet Fury?
Yeah. So as I said, I went into that agent and pitched this idea. And my ideas, and I think you said that this is true of you too, they come in sort of like bursts or sparks. Yeah.
We talked about that.
Yeah. So I basically pitched this like elevator pitch of a paragraph. And she said, okay, write that book. And I was like, shit, now I have to figure out what this book is actually mm-hmm. about. But I had these sort of two ideas in my head. I knew that I wanted to document the relationship between an actress and her therapist through their session notes together. And then I knew the big final twist at the end of the book. So I had a beginning and an ending, but I didn't know how to sort of string the two together. So I had to go figure that out. And it's really funny in retrospect that I wrote a thriller because I don't usually read thrillers. I'm scared of action movies. Like it's really not me.
Actually.
Yeah. And you wrote a thriller too.
Yeah. I'm scared of so many movies.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything, nothing gory, no blood.
Yeah, I'm the same way. But the reason why I chose writing a thriller is because I felt for myself that my strength as a writer was in my prose and in my dialogue because of my theater background, mm-hmm. and my weakness was in plot. And a thriller lives and dies by plot and structure. Like if you don't have a tight plot for a thriller, you don't have a book. And so this was my way of teaching myself how to create a plot.
Wow.
So before I began, I spent weeks just working on the outline, mm-hmm. getting as bulletproof an outline as possible. And then I wrote it just like really fast over the course of 6 months. Then I sent it to my amazing writers group. And at that point, I mentioned that they're making this film adaptation of Tender as the Night. In the first draft, it was not Tender as the Night. It was this made up film that I wrote, and I knew it sucked. I knew it was a placeholder, but I didn't know what it should be. And so I sent it to my writers group, and one of the writers in the group, the amazing writer Blair Hurley, said, the characters and the themes and the subject matter are really reminding me of Tender as the Night. What if they were making an adaptation of Tender? And I had never read Tender as the Night.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. I'd only ever read The Great Gatsby. Mm-hmm. And so I dropped everything and read Tender and realized her suggestion was genius. And then I went down this Fitzgerald rabbit hole where I read literally everything he ever wrote, every book that was ever written about him. I became like a Fitzgerald expert. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized that this book should be in conversation, not just with Tender, but with his work as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about his work in general? What are your thoughts on Fitzgerald?
Mixed. which I think shows up in the book. I mean, I first read Gatsby in high school, like probably everybody in this audience, and I loved Gatsby. One of my favorite things as a reader is poetic lyrical prose, and Fitzgerald is like the master of that. I mean, it's just so gorgeous. And so that aspect of Fitzgerald, I always and will always love. However, as I went down this Fitzgerald rabbit hole, I became more acquainted with Fitzgerald the writer and Fitzgerald the man, and I came to recognize his shortcomings. And what I mean by that is racism, the homophobia, the anti-Semitism, the classism, the sexism. And of those, Sweet Fury addresses the misogyny in his writing. To be fair, he was writing 100 years ago. He was a product of his time. And yet, does that mean that we should necessarily just give him a blind pass? Should we continue to revere Fitzgerald as the great American writer, or should these failings be addressed? And so Sweet Fury is my attempt to do that.
Amazing. What other themes do you explore in Sweet Fury?
A lot. I mean, a big one is the Me Too movement. This book is set in the film industry, which is where the Me Too movement exploded, which was, an issue that we're dealing with in pretty much every industry. But our country is so focused on fame and celebrity that was the perfect platform to sort of showcase what an issue it is. I think my book is in part a Me Too book. I don't think that is everything that it is. But I wanted to explore some new things about the Me Too movement. This is definitely set in the post-Me Too area, and I sort of pushed some ideas to the extreme. I think, there are a lot of books out there that are Me Too stories. Many of them are revenge stories. But in writing Sweet Fury, one of the most important things to me was to avoid a story that felt black and white. Like I wanted everything and everyone in this book to live in the gray area, because that felt most true to me of my experience of life. So no character is who they seem except for one in this entire book. And no one is strictly a hero or strictly a villain. They are all, to varying degrees, limited and flawed human beings. The title of this book is divided into 3 sections. And the title of the 3rd section is a quote from Tender as the Night. We must all try to be good. And I chose that for a number of reasons. But one is that these characters are all in their own way trying to do the right thing. So, when it comes to the Me Too movement, I don't know what adequate reparations look like for victims of sexual assault. I don't know if they exist. But, men, because usually it's men in this case, continue to get away with these crimes over and over again in our world. And they continue to be promoted to positions of, influence and power and respect. And because of, our values in the society, some people who don't get a pass. But one thing that I was exploring with Sweet Fury is that sometimes trapped in our society's pervasive sexism, a woman can also be guilty of condoning this sort of misogyny, either, to climb her own way up the ladder or to protect her own position. And under the right circumstances, a woman might be capable of committing atrocities just as terrible as those a man might commit, or maybe even worse.
I loved how all the characters live in the gray area, and you'll lead us in one direction and then just drop some huge piece of information. Just a major twist. And I thought I had everything figured out, but I didn't.
That's the best compliment. Thank you.
It was the best reading experience. Okay. And then can you talk about setting a little bit? So Montauk and the West Village serve as settings in Sweet Fury. Did you live in those places? Yeah. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah. Yes, is the answer. I think so I chose to write in those settings for a number of reasons. The most obvious basic reason is that we live in the West Village, and we try to get out to Montauk as often as possible. So it was really fun to put my characters in these places that I know and love. That aside, the Hamptons to me are really representative of some of Fitzgerald's trademark themes. Obviously they're a stone's throw from where Gatsby was set, but for me, they're sort of representative in their romantic beauty, their ostentatious wealth, the hedonistic lifestyle. The characters of Sweet Fury, they film their adaptation of Tender as the Night in this gorgeous estate off the old Montauk Highway, which is this beautiful road that's lined with these mansions that all have glorious views of the Atlantic. But for me, Sweet Fury is also an examination of America's persistent obsession with wealth. In America, to be successful is to be rich. This is as true today as it was 100 years ago. So I'm setting Sweet Fury in the Hamptons and the West Village because these are two of the wealthiest, most beautiful, most exclusive enclaves in our country. And so my attempt was to portray the most romantic, idealized portraits of these places and then peel back the skin to reveal the gritty underbelly of these worlds where fame and wealth persist in being our cultural religion.
Mm-hmm. Why is it that it's just so interesting to have a peek behind the curtain
in
these people's lives, in these characters' lives?
Thank you.
So does all this beautiful prose just pour out of you, or what is your writing process?
Oh.
You said you read the book 100 times out loud.
Yeah.
It's refreshing to hear you say that because I also do so many drafts. I've definitely read mine 100 times.
Yeah.
Not out loud though, but but yeah, could you talk about your writing process a little bit?
Yeah. I definitely went from being a pantser, which means like writing by the seat of your pants, with the first two, the failed book and then the okay book, to a diehard plotter, because did you used to be a pantser as well, or no?
A little bit. I've always really been a plotter.
Yeah, because you're a screenwriter. Yeah,
and I'm just too type A to be a pantser. I need to know where I'm going.
Yeah, I think I used to write sort of not knowing where I was going, and then I would inevitably write myself into a brick wall. And I've just become a complete convert to these outlines because even though I hate writing outlines, they're absolutely miserable. I do find that they act as scaffolding where I can then go off and wander and play in a particular direction that I am inspired by. But if I get overwhelmed, which I always do, I always have that to return to ground me. With that, the thing that I am most scared of as a writer is the blank page. Like I definitely have imposter syndrome where I'm like, okay, this is the end. That was everything that I was capable of writing and we are done, So the blank page just terrifies me. And so the way that I write, my policy is just word count. It's writing 2,000 words a day. Then I have the comfort of knowing like I have the words on the page and I know how to edit and make it better. So no, I mean, the sentences do not pour out of me at all. But I really appreciate that comment because like that is my favorite part of writing is sort of the more lyrical prose. And that's why I read it aloud so many times is because it is important to me, like the rhythm of it. Like it feels almost like lyrics or like a song. Like there's poetry. A rhythm to it. Yeah. And I will just say it out loud over and over again until I get that rhythm exactly right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so do you go back and you rewrite over and over again?
Over and over again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you work in Word, Scrivener? Do you handwrite?
I'm switching to Scrivener. How about you?
I love Scrivener.
Yeah.
Good choice.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
I also handwrite.
Wow. No, I don't do that because I can't read my handwriting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had some scenes set at Princeton where we both went. How did your experience there impact you as an author, as a person? You talked about this a little bit already.
Yeah.
And I loved the description of Princeton in the book. It was beautiful, lyrical, like a dream. Could you just talk a little bit about that process?
I think, I really lucked out in that with the Fitzgerald aspect and Fitzgerald having gone to Princeton and like all of these things being braided together, the pump and slipper, like without giving away any spoilers, like all of these Princeton things that are so integral to this plot. that just, I mean, I really lucked out that Fitzgerald happened to go there as well. Like this was not a part of the plan from the very beginning. But I mean, Princeton's just so easy to write about, right? It's just like familiar territory for both of us.
Yeah.
I don't think there'll be any more Princeton in my
in
next
other
books.
books?
Yeah. What about for you?
I could see returning to it.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've grown after writing each book, and I just I would love to just rewrite everything I've already written.
Yeah.
I don't know about you.
We both have the issue though of like both of our books are partially set at Princeton and both present really dark views of Princeton in ways in which we're like, we loved Princeton.
That's so funny. Yeah. It really wasn't my intention to present a dark portrayal of the school. More just like the fictional world.
Exactly. It's just like such a wonderful setting for a lot of mysterious things to happen. Yeah.
Yes. And then, okay, Plotter, Pantser, we went over that. Oh, anything? How has the debut process been?
It's been a roller coaster ride. I think like it's been really exciting. There have been some incredible highs, but it's also just the reality is different from anything that I could have dreamed of, right? Or sort of envisioned for myself. I think like the thing that I'm grappling with is, as I'm like still totally in the middle of it and not processing it quite yet, is a very human thing that could happen in the book industry or any industry, which is that like it's a very Sash thing, and maybe it's just a human thing of like 5 years ago I would have killed to just have my book published. Like I would have paid somebody to just let my book be published, right? Like a teeny tiny deal, like no money, nothing, right? And this is an incredible opportunity and I'm so lucky. And also I'm like, okay, now what? You know, like I don't feel like, oh, I've arrived, like, you know, and I think that's just like the human experience. Like, is that how it's always going to feel, you know?
I completely relate. And that's such a strange thing about having these goals, career goals, goals for your life. You get to that point and you wonder, what else? What's next?
Yeah.
And I do think it's a very relatable human thing.
Yeah.
But it's so exciting. And have you had any great moments, positive moments so far?
Yeah. I think like the big standout ones are, so with my agents, I am very lucky in that I have really incredible agents. I didn't end up working with the one that I pitched those ideas to. I submitted blind to sort of the top agents in the industry, my dream agents, and one of whom was a partner at William Morris. She's Oprah's agent. She's like very, very fancy. And when you submit blind, you submit basically a cover letter in the first 10 pages. And she responded that day and said, send me the draft. And then I, meanwhile, had gotten an offer of representation from a different agent. And I emailed her saying, excuse me, I got this offer, you know. And she responded and she was like, I'm halfway through, give me the weekend. And then Monday, she offered me representation, which was just a game changer. I would not be where I am if it weren't for working with her. So that was a huge one, selling the book. And I hadn't known, they didn't tell me ahead of time, but William Morris basically said internally, like, this is going to be our big book. We want to put the whole agency behind this book. And we're not going to tell Sash, but we're slipping it to international scouts. And so I was busy like waiting to hear from publishing houses in the US. And 2 weeks in, all of a sudden I went from 2 agents to 6 in one day. And my international agent suddenly called me and said, we've got Germany on the line.
So
and they're offering a pre-op. Like it was crazy. And then it was just like a new country every day. Like that was a crazy moment.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Have you gotten to read any of those versions yet in other languages?
No, I want to. So the French one just came out and I really want to read it in French.
Me too. I want to read it in French.
Yeah.
Cool. That's amazing. And seeing it in a bookstore in another country will be really cool.
Yeah, and all the different covers. It was really like an exciting moment to see, which I was not expecting at all, to see my book in an airport bookstore. I felt like, oh wow.
Your family must be very proud too.
Yeah, I hope so.
Do you have any advice for any writers in the audience?
Yeah. I mean, I think one is, I mean, my writers group saved me. So if you're a writer, you should have at least one trusted writer friend whose opinions you really respect. And when they give you advice, listen to them. I think obviously everybody says read, but I think it's also important to read well, like to choose what you read very carefully, because all of it sort of seeps in and affects you as a writer. And I think like at the end of the day, the biggest thing, I mean, you write every day if you can. But the biggest thing is like, you did too, I'm sure. And I definitely just encounter rejection over and over and over and over again. And that's inevitable for everybody. And I think you just have to keep on asking asking yourself, what am I doing this for? And is this the thing that I have to do? Right. Which should be a constant question in your life. Like, I thought I was going to be an actor, right? And now I don't miss acting at all. Because that's an ever evolving thing, is who you are and what you're meant to do in life. But if you keep on asking yourself that question, despite all of the rejections, and you keep on coming back to, no, this is what makes me happy. This is what I'm meant to do. You have to keep listening to that and keep on pursuing it. And someday you're going to get a yes.
That's really beautiful. And what drives you? Is it that drives you?
Oh, we just had this conversation.
Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I think it's ever evolving, but I do think, like, at the end of the day, despite all of the reasons not to sit down at the desk, that is really what I want to do. Is I want to, like, I get excited by some vision of a new story, and I want to sit down and write that, create it.
So it's about the craft.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's about storytelling. Like, that's what acting and directing and writing is. It's all different versions of storytelling, and it's about creating and telling stories. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's something so cool about being able to write this story that you think is one thing and then share it with the world, and everyone draws on their own experience and it becomes something new.
Yeah. I think my dream, as I'm figuring out like who I am as a baby writer and like who I want to be, my dream for myself is to create these books that are page turners that you like pick up for fun, and it's escapist and fun to read and a joyful experience, but that also slipped in there is something important that I see about our society that needs to be addressed, that needs to change. So you're getting your medicine too, but in a fun way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything else you want readers to know about you or about your book?
Oh God, no.
Or should we open up to questions?
Yeah.
Does anyone else have questions?
Yeah. Yes.
What was it like coming up with the title?
Oh God. All right, I'm going to be a little bit inappropriate. So Sweet Fury was not always called Sweet Fury. It was for many years called Sweet Warm Dark. And the reason why it was called Sweet Warm Dark, I was very attached to that title. The book, as I mentioned, is in 3 sections. Each section was sweet, warm, dark. And they were meant to show the 3 different sides of Lila. It was also pulled from a Fitzgerald quote, which is near the end of the second part of the book. It's from this really obscure Fitzgerald short story that it's this romantic short story, and it ends with this line, and they looked at one another with infinite hope as they crossed over into the new sweet warm darkness. And that was meant to be this really hopeful romantic line, but I always was like, that's also kind of chilling. Like, there's this darkness to that. And I love that. I love that dichotomy. It felt very representative of my book. There's like a really strong sense of dichotomy, hence also Sweet Fury. And my husband's like party game for a long time was going into the party and saying, sweet, warm, dark, what does that make you think of? And we found there were 2 distinct camps. One was like hot fudge sundae territory, and one was vaginas.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was like one or the other. Neither of which was my intention, but interesting. But anyway, so, when I partner with this agent, she's a tastemaker in the industry. She's very picky. And she was like, It's going to be a big book. It's going to be the next Gone Girl. It needs a shit ton of work, but love the title. And I was like, oh, thank God, like, the title's good, great. And then we sold the book to Simon and Schuster. And I remember my first email from my editor, who I love, was like, yay, so excited. Let's meet up. Let's celebrate the book. Let's talk about the future. Also, let's talk about the title. It's like, oh no. But it was a real learning experience, because what I learned is that I thought titles were about like getting at the core, at the essence of a book.
Mhm.
And it is not at all. Like, titles are purely about marketing. It's about like, what is going to make a reader pick the book up, and what title are they going to remember? And the issue with that my editor had was internally that people were mixing up the three, sweet, warm, dark. And you really don't want somebody to forget the title, right? So that sort of like commenced a period of 2 months where I sent them like hundreds of titles. Hundreds. I totally lost all perspective. I kind of went insane. And it got to the point where I had, like, some of them we got really close, and I'm so glad in retrospect that they were not the titles.
Do you have any examples?
Oh my God.
That's okay if you don't.
No, yeah. Let's see. To Touch Her Hand was close. There was one that was just like so pulpy. It was like very clearly, it felt like a bodice ripper that got really close. Oh, Take Me. Yeah. Which is a recurring line in the book. But yeah, so I had this Google spreadsheet, and I like was out of ideas. And so I basically was like playing word soup and just like sending combinations of words. And I like sent them a list and was like, this and this and Sweet Fury, you know? And they were like, Sweet Fury, actually. And I mean, you know, looking back at it now, I'm so happy that it is. I think Sweet Fury is a great title. And I feel like it's representative of the book in, I mean, the theme, in the dichotomy that I talked about, and also just sort of like the sort of lush sensory nature of that title, which I think is representative of the writing. Yeah.
And it sticks in your head. Definitely.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see if you took all the things you'd like the title to represent, throw it in, input it into AI.
Oh, no.
I actually did the AI exercise as well.
Really?
Like, ChatGPT wasn't quite as developed then as it is now, but like, yeah, it wasn't. I wonder what they would spit out now. I'm sure they would be better titles than they were then.
They
Yeah.
came up with Sweet Furry.
Yeah.
Here's the question.
You talked a little bit about the fear of the blank page, and like, as an artist, like I kind of relate a lot to that. And then I also, like, for you as a question, like, how did you deal with that? Especially, did you ever like run into writer's block, or like a point when you were writing the book, you were like, oh my God, like, like nothing's coming up, and how do you deal with that?
Well, this is the other tactic that I have besides just writing crap, which is what I do, is the outline, right? Like, I do have writer's block, but if I'm dealing with a writer's block in the outline and just forcing myself not to write until I have that outline, then the writer's block is less of an issue, because I always have the next beat to go to. For my next book, before I even began, I've written a very messy first draft of it, but before I even began writing that book, I wrote a 40-page outline that was like not bullet points. It was like all paragraph, you know, like it was very intense. But I feel so much safer just having that there.
We bonded over that before.
Yeah.
Long outline.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you mentioned, I don't know anything about plots, but you said you essentially, I assume you studied plot at school, but then you re-taught yourself plot as you were writing this book. What was the difference between school taught plots and your self-taught plots, or was there?
I don't know how strong the teaching was of plot in school for me. Like, looking back, my creative writing courses at Princeton were incredible, but they weren't about like plot and structure. It was like writing these artistic. There's a lot of freedom in like the short stories that we were crafting, and it wasn't really about that. So I actually didn't feel that well equipped in that side of things. It was mostly, I think part of it was just sort of like subliminally ingested through theater, right? Of just like having an inherent understanding, and also like the playwriting of just like what sort of the beats that, especially as a director, like knowing when something isn't working, something's not moving. And I spent a lot of my directing career was working with young playwrights and like developing plays. So I was very much a part of that story crafting, editing process. But then I found like I kind of had to teach myself that craft of like how do you make a snappy plot sort of all over again when I began this book. And so we were just talking about this. Like I read Robert McKee's Story, I read Save the Cat, and then the one that really blew my mind was Anatomy of Story, which I just returned to over and over again. It's so dense. It's so overwhelming. I don't know if anybody's read it here, but like it's a book that I just keep on reading and getting progressively more overwhelmed. But like it's just this masterclass in plot and structure. What about you? You have a good answer for this too.
I have others that I really like as well as those. I like On Writing by Stephen King, his memoir. And then there's one by Stephen Koch called Modern Library Writers Workshop, which is just a really great craft book that I love.
Yeah.
And I'm similar to you. I feel like I've had to teach myself plot. I guess I studied screenwriting in grad school, and that sort of gave me the 3-act structure. But then I also outline for months and rework the plot. And even then I'll go off on tangents and re-outline.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a long process, but I can relate to your process a lot.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Are you ever going to go back to directing in the theater?
I don't know. I don't miss it. I think there are for a number of reasons. I think I was a freelance theater director, which meant that in order to get by and make a career as a freelancer, probably 90% of the jobs I was taking were things that I wasn't completely passionate about, full throttle, So the amount of projects that I was like, I am in love with this project were so few in terms of the percentage. And it's such a hard life. I also am an introvert at heart. And I just think writing a novel is just sort of another form of storytelling. It's quite similar to directing. There's just sort of more control. And so I really love, being a writer and that sort of that isolated.
But if you could direct the play, I'm sure you probably are doing the cinematic movie thing, but
yeah. I think
I
think the dream version of my career, not anytime soon, but farther down the line, would be to adapt and direct the film TV versions of my books, right? I'm nowhere near that now, right? But eventually that's sort of the pipe dream, sort of marrying all of it. I feel like I'm getting back to my acting roots with the audiobook and, getting back in touch with my directing roots that way. Nancy Meyers, but really dark.
I like that.
Yeah. Anything else? All right.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank
you.
Books for sale, and I'm sure they'll sign it for you. So please come on up, and thank you guys again.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.